Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. And welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos and I've been thinking that as both Hadestown and Starlight Express are closely related to railways, these are shows that should have bonus tracks. And actually, looking at it slightly more seriously, they do. There have been a whole host of new songs added to Starlight Express as it develops over the number of years that it's been in existence, and Hadestown has drastically reworked some of its original songs since its original concept album. However, if you're looking for a flip answer, one of the bonus tracks for any album of Starlight Express can simply be created by removing the letter A from a well-known children's song. Because given as they have to have special aisles added to any theatre staging Starlight Express, you could have the runway train came down the track and she blew. Except, of course, this version of Starlight Express does not blow at all, if you'll pardon the modern idiom. Now, it's pretty clear what two shows we're going to be talking about today. You're correct, it is Starlight Express and it is Hadestown, and they do both have connections to railways, and they both are in their way modern or contemporary shows. As I said last week, they have the blessing of having their authors still be alive. And they're also connected because both shows were part of the blockbuster of wonderful musicals that you could have seen in London over the summer of 2024. And so this week, we're going to be resuming our conversation with the wonderful Josh Clark to talk about these two impressive shows. And as I trailed last week, these are shows that Josh really enjoyed. And so I hope you'll enjoy this conversation where you'll hear him bubbling over with enthusiasm and excitement as he talks about Hadestown and Starlight Express. Musical Talk. Josh, always a pleasure to see you. Now, you and I were talking about what might be described as quite the enjoyable journey through West End shows that we've seen recently. It's not quite the journey that Orpheus undertakes on his way to the underworld, but that is quite a painful introduction for me to say, but you've been to see Hadestown, which is near as damn it to the underworld as we're going to get. And I'm not muddling up with that famous operetta Orpheus on the Underground.
No, indeed. Orpheus in the Underworld is not the show we're talking about. Hadestown, which is, of course, the Orpheus and Eurydice story. I was excited to see it because it was one of the best billed shows this theatre season, if you like.
Now, what do you mean by best billed? You mean advertised?
Advertised, yes. Sorry to use the Americanism there. And it's got a lot of hype around it. It turns out that it is the West End debut of the show, despite having been in the National Theatre previously.
So it's been to London before, but not in the commercial sector.
Exactly, yeah. Yes, exactly. And it has been on Broadway, so it's started in America and come over. Other shows go in the opposite direction, of course.
I think of it as an American show.
Yes.
But did you say Vermont?
Yes, okay, we were talking off mic, weren't we? Originally, so 2006 or 2007, it began in Vermont as a piece of community theatre and has clearly grown very well since then. And, again, drawing on previous conversations we've had, you can see those origins in this production. Heartily recommend it. Of course, it was absolutely exceptional musically, more than anything else. So we'll get into that a little bit more. But just to finish that point on the origins of it, you begin with basically everyone on stage. You've got the musicians on stage throughout.
Are they acting musicians or are they with the actors?
They are with the actors, but there are a few moments where they're highlighted and do a little bit of acting, but it's mostly musicians.
There's merge and overlap, but they are separate.
Yes.
How interesting.
Yeah, lovely aesthetic. There's a lot of really interesting... I'm not really sure how to describe it, because I would imagine if you don't know anything about Hadestown, apart from the fact that it is Orpheus in the Underworld, then that could feel, well, if I were imagining it, it would be something maybe quite very traditional, very this is obvious, isn't it? Very Greek, togas, something that's certainly not what Hadestown is, which is Southern American blues, jazz.
It sounds like it's escaped its roots as one of the classics, is what you're sort of telling me, into what might be called a sort of, when I say parochial, I mean it in its positive sense, as in homely, homespun, close to reality, rather than... It's not Olympian.
No.
It's real. It's here on the earth, oddly.
It's real, and it's true to the classic story, or classical story, but as though people in America were telling it in their own way.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. And the juxtaposition of the classical content and the story that, you know, people will largely be aware of, with the culture of this blues music, black music, with the Greek legend, the Greek myth, it works somehow really, really well. And it's intrinsically connected in this show. Orpheus's journey is, I guess, with the idea of fate, which is the classical idea, with in this show being on a railroad, okay, as the Americans would call it. And at the end of the line is where you find Hades. And so you've got all this great southern blues music almost coming out of, I presume, slavery, building these amazing railroads across America, and the songs that would have been sung as people were building these, you know, and that becomes the almost framing device, I guess, in a way, for where Orpheus begins in, well, it's a kind of timeless, placeless thing, because that very much is the music.
Yeah.
The physical setting could almost be anywhere. They're in a bar. Is where the piece begins. So you've got the musicians who are just playing in the bar, and you've got Eurydice, who is a barmaid, and you've got Orpheus, who's a local young guy who comes and sings in the bar. You know, with
so far so normal.
Yeah, exactly. With his obviously amazingly beautiful voice that is Orpheus. That was his gift, wasn't it, from the gods? But you do have, again, in Greek tradition, a trio, the muses, the ones who know the story, the chorus, actually.
A Greek chorus is a famous thing.
But a Greek chorus singing the blues of the Deep South is not a traditional thing. And the music is stunning. And they've clearly taken Orpheus and his symbolism as being this musical being, and just woven that into the fabric of everything. The music is the most important part of this show. The scenery, you know, and the stagecraft of all that is fine. Things don't really move. Like, it's one location.
It sort of doesn't need to.
Doesn't need to at all. Doesn't need to at all. The music's amazing, and all the more so for having the actors on stage. So you've got the one pianist, kind of separate from the other musicians, who's clearly the MD as well, and he is just playing the most amazingly virtuosic stuff, which you can just watch the whole time. You've got the trio of muses narrating on all this at the end of the line. You don't see Hades until just before the end of the first act, so you've got this brooding presence, and this kind of show works, I think, because you know what's going to happen, but you're waiting for it. You know, and when's Hades going to appear, and what's he going to be like? And actually the actor, I forget his name, but he is one of the most decorated singers, bass singers, opera singers in America. If you read online about him, he's won everything. And you can see why. You know, it's written as a bass voice, and it fits the Hades devil character, doesn't it? To be, you know, low.
Oh, you'd expect that, yes. Quite, It's not going to be a soprano.
No, because contrast that with Orpheus, who is,
Lyrical and light.
countertenor.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff. And when you get them singing together, their voice becomes the character, and you just know who they are because of the kind of music that they're singing.
So are you sort of suggesting that you also get character delineation through the harmonic resonances of the way they sing
100%,
together?
100%.
That's really interesting.
100%. And the music and the songs kind of merge with each other. So you've got Orpheus, I say this in a positive sense, wailing.
Yes.
And then Hades just comes in with something far more metronomic and beat and driving forward and powerful. And then in between those two things, I think you've got Eurydice, who's obviously in love with the music of Orpheus, but in this production, in this show, Eurydice isn't just the helpless.
No, I hope not.
Follower. No, she isn't at all. She's got plenty about her, and she is choosing to go down into the underworld, and she chooses Hades for a while, and you do get the culmination of the story, which of course is the epic journey out of Hades, isn't it, back to the world above, and they're walking in a circle, just on and on and on and on, and this amazing song, and Hades is there in the middle, and I think actually from memory there might be some kind of stagecraft where he disappears down into the bowels of it all for a while, and just the tension builds, and you're willing them not to look back, but it's fate, isn't it, and you know it's going to happen. Gosh, I've really gone on there, but it's not. What this isn't is someone who's just decided, let's do a modern version of Orpheus and Eurydice, and just done it and written songs for it. It's such a cleverly, musically crafted piece. And as I hinted out, talking about the actor playing Hades, a pretty stellar cast. I mean, playing Eurydice was an actor that we saw, Grace Hodgett Young. We saw her make her West End debut in Sunset Boulevard.
We did, yeah.
And she's in fact, it felt to me like she was using Hadestown, this pretty much blockbuster West End show, as a little interval before she goes to Broadway with Sunset Boulevard, which she is going to do. Really nice to see her in this. Very different character from who she was playing in Sunset Boulevard. But yeah, I strongly recommend it. This is a musical theatre show. I think I've spoken about this on Musical Talk before. Sometimes you get shows which need actors who sing, and sometimes you get musicals who need singers who act. And this is one of those falls into the category of the singers who act. The acting's brilliant. It's basically sung through the whole show, though. So it's a singing show.
It's almost operatic in that sense.
Yes.
As you mentioned, in fact, really.
Yeah, which is fascinating when you listen to the cast recordings and realise it's jazz and it's blues, and yet you're feeling like it's opera, and maybe you're overlaying the
tropes of one.
The tropes, exactly. But yeah, it's it's brilliant.
Now, I've got to make the observation that I know Orpheus in the Underworld from the English translation at the ENO in the 1980s. And there's a marvellous song in it called Hooray, Hooray for Mercury. It's a light, fluffy piece of Offenbach nonsense. And it ends with the actor playing Mercury singing about a sausage. Now, I've got to ask, does anyone stop to have a meal in this show?
No.
Oh, that is an enormous pity, because I was rather hoping we might be able to finish on, well, here's to the Hades who lunch.
Gosh. Well, if this show were a sausage, I'd want it to roll and roll.
Hey! Always leaving with a banger. Right. So that's Hadestown. Obviously, we're getting, strong recommend, to use the modern terminology. And I'm sorry that I didn't get to see it. And I can't say I wasn't warned. You told me over and over again that I ought. It's also a really striking cover. Red rose in a black and white monochromatic photograph. Yeah. But, and I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that the journey to the underworld is, of course, a train. Yes,
it's the railroad. They're walking down it, but yes, you're right, that's there.
Yeah, so they're using train-related infrastructure because, well, it's not unconnected with the show we're going to talk about now, which is literally about trains. All kinds of trains, including trains of the future as well as trains from the past. Right. Let's name it. It's one of your favourites. You've been talking so positively about it for me now for over a year. It's Starlight Express. And you have history with Starlight Express. It's a show you adore. Why do you adore it?
Oh, and that's it. Because, we're coming from Hadestown, which
It's dark.
Well, it was dark, and it's a masterpiece, and it's musically exceptional. And I loved it. Now, I do love Starlight Express. That's largely probably because I saw it when I was young. And so nostalgia does have a heavy part to play in this.
And it's really dark.
Oh, yeah, it's rarely dark, no, indeed. Now, that's not to say that it's not musically good, but it is certainly musically different, you know. But I was very excited to see this production. When I saw it previously, it was the national tour, and so I saw it put into a proscenium arch theatre with a few kind of decent-ish, but skateboard ramps nonetheless, in either wing. And so you had people on roller skates, as everyone is aware of this, how the show works, you know, going back to front on the stage. Well, I was excited for this because it's been put into the Troubadour at Wembley, where we saw, and I believe spoke about on Musical Talk, Newsies back along.
Indeed.
Which is essentially a small arena, really, isn't it?
You can build and redesign this venue in any way you like for each show, and it is for spectacle shows which are going to be there for a medium-term run at least, because you have to build a show about it. So yes, ideal for Starlight Express, which we know is an infrastructure-heavy show, because you need to have runways for the people on the roller skates who are playing the trains.
Well, and Germany loves this show, and they've built their own theatre specifically for this show in Bochum, where it's been running for 30 years and counting.
Yes.
Now, I'm not sure it's going to last 30 years in the Troubadour, but it works brilliantly there. It's probably about as well done as this show can be done, I think, and worth going to see for that reason. So, people who don't know the venue, if you imagine a kind of rectangular arena, you've got the traditional tiered seating in the rear third.
Yep.
And then for this production, you've got if you imagine a racetrack, a looped racetrack that goes around the other 2/3. You've got audience at strategic points, both inside and outside the racetrack ring.
Yes.
And then in the, let's call it it would be the upstage third of the auditorium, there's a pretty impressive ramp. If you imagine a skate park and imagine the steepest ramp there, that is the back of the stage.
I watched in the 2021 Olympics, I watched for the first time the skateboarding. And the ramps for that were enormously deep, that I wouldn't want to accidentally slip or slide down. Exactly that on stage. Quite remarkable. So we're talking, you've got to be a high-performing roller skater to make any of those...
And scooter rider in
and
this
scooter,
case as
there
well.
were two scooter riders, weren't they, who were acting as kind of sort of referees.
Yes.
Because they were dressed in black and white checkered flags, you know, the finishing flag. And they sort of followed on like they were judges, but also acted as a way of clearing path logistically, because actually many of those cycle lanes or roller skate tracks were also the exits for people who might want to go to the lavatory, leaving the auditorium throughout the performance.
And we started our discussion of Starlight Express by talking about the layout, because this show needs it. You know, you can go into as much depth as you'd like, and I guess we will, about the plot and the characters and things, but really that, I would say, is probably in this show slightly less important than the visuals, really. And you've got
the idea,
because it's a child's imagination, isn't it? It's a dream.
Overtly.
As
a child in a bed at the beginning.
Which there hasn't always been.
Now, tell me more. Because you remember this show from the original iteration, and we have a revised 21st century version, essentially.
We talked about this a little bit, didn't we, on the train afterwards. But I'm not sure if this particular point came up, because the child actor was really important and pretty omnipresent on stage. Now, the character of Control, they're called Control in the imaginary world because they start the race and end the race, and they're in charge of the trains as the child. Well, in previous productions, that has just been a voiceover.
Of a child? Or of a grown man?
No. You listen to different cast recordings. This is Control. This is Control. It doesn't really sound like a child, I must say.
Right.
Now, I'm trying to think back 20 years or so here. I think that in the previous production I saw, the national tour, you had a child at the very beginning being tucked into bed and perhaps reappeared at the end, but that is it. And then it's voiceover of just someone controlling the trains. That child character is now fundamental to it.
Very much so,
and it really softens the story for me. And it
beneficially or otherwise?
I think that, and this isn't me sitting on the fence or just avoiding the question, I think that is a matter of taste on this occasion.
Fair enough. It's just this version's way of doing it.
Yes. I think to a young child audience member in this theatre, which is so immersive, I mean, just to go from the beginning of when you walk into the theatre, it's neon lights everywhere, isn't it? Like it begins when you walk in.
Well, even as you're walking up a corridor and you're about to turn left into where the seating area is, there's a sign that says, "Please keep moving along the platform."
Yes. So it's lovely and immersive. And if I was 6 years old going to see this production, I'd be, entranced by it.
Oh, you must have been 6 years old then, because you were absolutely. I can tell you, I was sitting next to you. You were entranced by it.
I was, but there are some things in this update which, to my taste now, I think I preferred the previous version.
That's interesting.
And it is just a matter of taste. So anyway, the child thing I think works really well here, and you had this starlight planetarium feel, didn't you, with these celestial objects hanging down from the ceiling. So you're in no doubt that this is magical space age. Space age isn't quite the right word, actually, isn't it? But imagination is where we are. So should we go for some of the updates and things and some of the changes?
Well, I think we ought to. I just want to lay my own cards on the table because you have experience of this show and I've never seen it before. I didn't really know the songs from it, although I realised I knew the title song, Starlight Express, once I'd heard it. And it's such a lovely sort of ethereal song, completely at odds with the rest of the score, interestingly. And I think that it is that the Starlight Express is a kind of mythical creature within the world of the trains. He's a kind of fairy godmother, and I think we've got to talk about Cinderella here, because there's a touch of Cinderella in this plot. If Rusty, the steam train, is cinders, and cinders and Rusty both suggest antiquated or dirty or in some way overlooked. And then there are two ugly sisters. I mean, literally, there's the diesel train greaseball, and then there's Electra. They play the role of the two ugly sisters, in my view. If the Starlight Express is a kind of thing a lot of people are yearning for and doesn't quite manifest, but it does through a song, and that is, if you like, a form of fairy godmother. To me, that's how I was interpreting it. But it was brand new to me. You and I have been having this conversation for a year and a half about I want to see it, and you said, come and see it with me. I said, yes, I will, absolutely. You've opened my eyes to Andrew Lloyd Webber on a number of occasions now. But I didn't know the piece at all. So we went in, you were really looking forward to it from experience. I was looking forward to it from this will be a new experience. And I was completely delighted. So that's the page we're on. I'm a convert. And I think it's a lovely show. And lovely is the word. I think it's sweet. It's charming, and I could recommend it to a lot of people in my circle, and I'm going to. But because you've got this experience of what it was and what it is, where I've only got what it is, to me it felt very interesting. It's that the neon lights and the lasers, even though lasers are a bit later, it felt like an 80s show. Funny enough, it had that bling, that theatrical bling that you got in the 80s. Yeah. But it had a sensibility which felt like it had been tweaked, and we both spotted it. I didn't know the original, but we spotted something which I said that structurally you can see what it was and what they've added to it. But you can see that the remnants are still there in the structure. We'll talk about this in a minute. I mean, we're talking principally about what is the clean fuel. It was clear in the structure that Electra was the fuel of the future because he or she they were the electric train, or the electric train future. And now we have Hydra as a new character, I gather, who represents hydrogen, which is the will it ever come, but it could be the future fuel.
It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Yeah, a song that's repeated ad nauseam, but actually quite pleasantly. I quite like it, but not everyone does. And of course, they also use it. I mean, without ruining anything, it turns out to be integral to the solution and the resolution.
Yeah, I don't think there's spoilers in this show.
No, you're right. All right. In which case, hydrogen is connected to steam, and that allows them to win. That was a spoiler, which I don't think was in the original. But no. I could tell that Hydra was a new character, and because it was very clearly sharing ground with Electra, and the structure says Electra's got to do this in the piece, where Hydra is a bolt-on, and it felt like that. Not in an unpleasant way. And if you weren't used to the kind of structure of a show, I don't think you'd spot it. But it was clear to me that you could see. The working showed you that. Now, that's all I've got to offer on what the differences were. What I spotted just as a fairly, average intelligence audience going knows a little bit about theatre. You spotted lots.
Yeah, there's a bit more. And it's part of the fabric of this show that it does change from time to time. Now, perhaps not as significantly as the number of changes that were in this production from the previous one, but from its inception in various productions, Angelo Weber has added a song at a time, sometimes 2 or 3 at a time. One of the most famous songs in Starlight Express is Make Up My Heart, and I don't know how many people realise that wasn't even then one of the original songs. That was added, I think in the 90s, which just added a little bit more of the kind of love interest between Rusty and Pearl, isn't it? And so that just sets the context of paving the way for changes to be legitimate in future editions. So you're quite right. Electra, when I saw it previously, was a very intimidating, evil to a young child's eye character, and you clearly wanted Steam to win. Well, you still clearly want Steam to win here, but because Hydrogen or Hydra is there as a new character, and as soon as you have a new train, by the way, you've also got to have new carriages.
So people to connect with.
So the whole kind of race setup, because these trains all race each other, is busier than it used to be. It feels less Steam versus Electric and kind of just everything against Steam for a while, and until, like you say, they kind of join up. But I'm going to jump onto a little phrase you mentioned, which was the fairy godmother. And you then described the show as sweet and lovely. And I agree with all of that. I don't think, had you seen the production 20 years ago, that you'd necessarily at first describe the show as sweet and lovely and with a fairy godmother feel, because there's been some other fundamental changes. And this is where earlier I was saying your reaction to this production, if you'd seen an earlier iteration, would be just a matter of taste. And I genuinely think it is, because you've got the child on stage throughout, and this child has a very strong, loving relationship with his mother at the beginning, and that is fundamental to everything. And
it's warm and homely, isn't it? Immediately,
it's warm and homely, and you get that feeling, I think, all the way through. He's wearing his pajamas, isn't he? Really, and
although they are sort of spaceman pajamas, yes.
Pajamas. And
I suppose the character is speech marks adorable.
Yes, and this mother character, becomes a train character in the imaginary world as well, doesn't she?
Yes, the boy in our case, I believe it's not always a boy, sometimes there's girls. So we're going to use the word boy because we saw a boy on the night. So the boy interpolates his mother into the train story, you're right, and she plays an older steam train who's still got the dynamic will to race.
Yes.
Which Rusty, our steam hero, seems to be, he lacks a little bit of the competitive spirit.
That's right, and this character is called Mama. And previously, the equivalent character was Popper something.
Yeah.
Now, it's still a parent figure, but I think there is a difference in the relationship between either a mother and son, as we saw, or a mother and daughter, as it will be in some performances of this, and a father and son, as it has been previously.
Yes.
Because, again, going back to what I said earlier, the child character was not present. And so the father-son relationship, traditionally in this show, has been Popper, insert surname, I can't remember, and Rusty. And it's been more that Rusty, the youngest of the steam trains, right, whose duty is to carry on the legacy and fight against the rising tide of electricity, has this kind of weather-beaten but inspirational father / grandfather / storytelling mentor trope figure who's saying, Rusty, I have been the steam train for decade after decade. Look inside yourself. You know, this is like Mufasa to Simba.
Yes,
that's what the relationship in this show has been previously. And he was a tired old man, Popper, greasy and oily, and clearly done a hard shift. And it's more about a young male character living up to the expectations of his elders.
Yeah.
That's kind of gone.
Yes, I didn't get that at all particularly, no.
And like I said, it's a matter of taste. This works beautifully, but it's not that for me. And I think that the show has kind of lost a bit of that grimy power
edge
to it. That's right, and has become something more akin to a bit of a fairy tale, like you were saying with Cinderella and the fairy godmother. Not to its detriment. And I think nostalgia probably does have a major,
it must do,
major part in how I look at it. But that's a really major change, I think.
I didn't find it saccharine though, and there's a danger when you take edges away, particularly if you are sort of. I didn't find it sanitised either, although it does sound like it was more sanitised compared to what you're talking about. So I might be sanitised. It was not sanitised to the point of blandness, if it was sanitised. So I still got a lot out of it. I bought the character performances and the way they developed, etc., etc. But it's interesting, the loss of the Popper character. There's never any harm in reimagining characters and wondering whether actually they need to be a different gender. And that is a perfectly legitimate and reasonable thing. But of course, as you say, it becomes a matter of choice. You get one flavour and taste with this interpretation, you get a different flavour and taste with a different interpretation. And it's really interesting what you're talking about, the kind of weight of responsibility therefore on Rusty to continue the tradition of essentially a, let's say, a dying character, or at least a clapped out one, which isn't the character. Mama reinvigorates Rusty, but only does it by... She races where Rusty won't.
Yes.
And she succeeds, but at great personal expense, and she realises she can't go any further.
Yes.
So she is, speech marks, clapped out, but not... She's not clapped out to the point where you think she's going to stop.
No.
She now looks like she's off to a museum. That's the kind of thing. It's that kind of thing. Yeah.
And I just make the point about that because it to me it impacted on the narrative, not in a bad way, but it's just different. There are other updates in terms of gender in the show which I don't think make a blind bit of difference at all.
No.
And therefore, let's do it. So things like in the 1980s original, and even when it was on tour 20 years ago, all the trains who were at the front of the race and leading the carriages, obviously, were all ostensibly male, and all the coaches, following on, were all female.
Which is no longer the case.
No. And it doesn't need to be at all, does it? Of course. No. And it doesn't matter whether they're male, female, anything.
And it didn't at all.
No, exactly. So that's a kind of natural progression.
I should just say Electra was often referred to as they.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Which works with the character, doesn't it?
It did rather.
DC, I can switch and change my frequency. Fine. So that was a nice and inclusive...
It was indeed,
yeah.
I quite like the fact that Greaseball, the diesel engine, was quite... definitely a female character, but quite nice to be a non-stereotype female character. By which I mean, I'm going to use the terrible phrase butch, but butch and aggressive that character was, and actually how refreshing to see that on stage.
Yeah,
it's a major role. But it also, for me, really underlined the Ugly Sisters nature of it, because actually you could have seen those characters. The Ugly Sisters, although obviously usually played in British pantomime as dames, cross-dressing roles, they're still sisters. They're cruel sisters, and these felt like, they were rivals, but that's the avatar, I think. I mean, it's not an absolute perfect connection with Cinderella, and of course we do know that Andrew Lloyd Webber has more than one Cinderella under his belt.
Yes, that's true.
But this, you can certainly see that element to it. You were talking about and then there were also gender roles in the coaches.
Yes.
So I think it was, it appeared to be two women and a man, from the way they were presenting, and that made not the blindest bit of difference. Absolutely. I mean, as a love story, it's a fairly odd love story. In fact, the one who's weirdest here is Pearl, because Pearl looks like she's immediately keen on Rusty, because Rusty's a very appealing character. That then
No one does it better than a steam train.
But she throws her lot in with Diesel,
Yeah.
and she's later on sort of paired with Electra and doesn't seem to like it. But fidelity is not the first word that comes to my mind when it comes to Pearl, the first-class carriage, whereas the dining car character was genuinely, had proper fidelity to Diesel.
Yes. Yeah, you get that great song, I've been UNCOUPLED.
Yes, absolutely. Which I identified, certainly in my head, as being the equivalent of DIVORCED by Tammy Wynette.
And there's all sorts of... The songbook here is a real collection of different styles, isn't it? There actually is slightly more of a connection to Hadestown than just the fact there's trains, because you do have the kind of bluesy Southern American music kind of popping up, every now and then, and there was an interesting clash or fusion of Britain and America in the piece, wasn't there? Which we weren't quite sure where
it was speech mark set, as it were.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think of America as still having a much more fundamental train range than we do. British trains are... Well, they still have diesel and electric, but it's not that much.
No.
Steam is now almost entirely relegated to nostalgia museums and volunteer services. So it feels America in that sense, and the racing thing feels more American as well. But I checked, funny enough, the chap we had playing Rusty was one of the understudies by the name of Scott Hayward, and I thought he was brilliant.
It's very good.
I thought he was absolutely top notch. Now, I'm sure they've all been brilliant, but
Yes.
we got him and he was great. And he was very British. So
Yes.
Rusty the steam train was very British. I almost felt that he could roll off and... he could finish that show and then go straight into a Noel Coward. His enunciation was sort of brilliant. And I like that mix of flavours. And it was all in this ethereal world anyway. We mentioned this on the day. The Starlight Express fairy godmother concept, and the song reprises itself periodically, and it's so much more speech marks lyrical and magical than the other songs, and it has that. It almost acts as its own leitmotif for a character we don't quite see. And it's interesting what you were talking about in the original version, where Rusty, if you like, is the last of the line of steam trains that's got to carry on the legacy. I think I was telling you this, and I'm sure you know it already, that the last steam locomotive built in Britain for the British Railways in the 1960s, before they took steam off the lines, was called the Evening Star. Yeah, I believe you can see it at the York Railway Museum. But the Evening Star, of course, sounds like Starlight Express. You can sort of... It's not that million miles away from some of its sort of truthful position. We've got to talk about the geopolitics of it then, if that's the right word, which is that in 1970 blah, when it first came out, steam had only been off British Railways for 10 years, and there was a lot of nostalgia.
Yes.
We are now in 2024. Green politics and environmental matters are so much more important. It's quite difficult to root for Rusty. So whilst we all love going on steam trains, Rusty represents fossil fuels. Rusty represents the old ways. Rusty is a lovely character, but Rusty shouldn't win if you're trying to make the message about clean fuels. Diesel shouldn't win if you're trying to make the point about clean fuels. Electra ought to win, or hydrogen, except we're always told that hydrogen hasn't actually manifested yet into any form of genuine locomotive train.
Yes.
Which is why they do sort of fix it by giving Hydra the power to support Rusty, that's that combination between you take a steam train but you make it clean because it's using hydrogen.
That's it.
It's a lovely fix for the plot,
yes.
And it does fit in with a 21st century attitude, quite understandably. But you sort of lose the charm, don't you?
You probably do lose the charm. When you said geopolitics, there's more, and we haven't discussed this yet. A major change between these two versions was that the different trains formerly represented actual countries.
Yes, you did mention that.
Did I?
No, not in the recording, but you mentioned it on the day, but we didn't really explore it.
Yeah.
So who was who and what?
But from memory, all right, I can't remember exactly who, but Britain, America, France and Russia, I think.
Oh, right, okay.
I think.
Hang on, don't they all turn up in Pacific Overtures?
Right, yeah. I don't think I'm cross-pollinating those two, but maybe. Anyway, that's gone.
Yeah.
And that softens things a lot more again. Because now it is more just kind of nice train characters racing with the sustainability argument that you're getting into, but you haven't got the
world politics and war going on. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, in a way, you're right. That, I mean, the problem is you couldn't do that these days without that meaning so much more than it possibly did then.
But it's a big change.
Yes, I can see that it must be. It also makes it, how shall I put this? We're all human and we're more likely to root for ourselves.
Yes.
So whoever in a British audience will
Yeah.
presumably root for the character that was British, who I'm guessing was Rusty the Steam Train.
Yeah.
I wonder how that played in America. If Rusty was identified in those early versions as being British and wins, that sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but I assume it was a success. It's interesting that it's played so well in Germany, and I wonder if that version has retained its nationalist approaches.
I know that production has regular changes to keep people coming back.
Yeah,
I think.
So they might have done that some time ago and realised that was a wise thing.
I'd love to go and see it in Bochum at some point.
It helps make it more of a fable, or at least a fantasy, and and this ethereal thing. It makes it more of a dream, actually.
Oh, entirely.
Particularly as the boy must be about 7, 8, 9, 10. It would be interesting if he took, if a boy at that age was dreaming on nationalistic stereotypes.
Yes, yeah, exactly. But you didn't have that sense in the previous show that it was so much of a dream.
You really didn't.
No. It was this disembodied. This is control. Get ready for the race.
So it was in a netherworld almost.
Yeah.
Yes, that's really interesting. Where it is definitely, as you say, boy tucked up in bed by mother. Surrounded by his train models.
Yeah.
She picks him up off the floor because, like all children, he's quite messy.
So I guess the last thing to really get into that we haven't is just the how it all works on the roller skates. It's the major thing, isn't it? And I noticed that Arlene Phillips was in as the dramaturg
this time.
So making sure that all the narrative came together nicely. But she was involved from the very beginning and has been on all the different productions, probably as choreographer mostly.
Well, that's her great strength, isn't it?
Of course, yeah. And this did have a pretty long West End run.
There's no doubt that Starlight was an enormous success.
Yes, and it was in the Apollo Victoria, as now is, where Wicked is, and they put it in there. And for the time that it was in the West End, the production, let's say, had a Starlight skating school where you'd have a constant stream of, probably fairly recent theatre school graduates going
with the
through,
stamina.
Going through I don't know, 6-week, let's say, programme of learning to skate and then learning to dance skate and then learning to sing while you're dance skating. And
it's a big ask, isn't it?
It's a huge ask. And so anyway, Arlene Phillips would have been at the heart of all of that, and it's nice that you've got that link still going through. Talking about all these other strands that fit into the nostalgia of the piece. Andrew Lloyd Webber's son Nick died in the last year or so, and it was his brother, Nick's brother, Alistair, who wrote I Do, which is one of the new songs, and that was introduced to the production in Bochum in Germany recently and had gone down a storm, so they've put that into this production, and Andrew Lloyd Webber has dedicated this particular production to Nick as well, who always loved the show.
And was a bit of a train buff as a small child, I believe, so it sort of helps inspire the thing in the first place, which is a very nice thing to do and very humane. Yeah,
and it's nice that, we've still got Andrew Lloyd Webber able to make changes to his own show as well.
Indeed.
And that he's still, involved in this, and you can't level the criticism, with all the changes that I've talked about, that it isn't someone new coming in changing it, which would be different.
It would, yeah.
Actually. This is the writer just progressing the show, and it works fine, and you can't criticise it for that reason.
Which means one day, in a magical world where musical theatre is pushed on the pedestal it so rightly deserves to be, there could be a series of either recordings orally or a video of all the different changes. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have the complete Starlight Express with all the songs that have gone or been added over time with their dates, so you can also get that sense of a show developing, because it's quite rare, and particularly, as you say, under the stewardship of its original creators. And even when some of the songs are now being interpolated by not the original creators, but with their blessing.
Yeah, and you look through the whole catalogue of Andrew Lloyd Webber shows, who'd have thought that the one about trains with actors on roller skates would have done so well.
Has such a legacy.
Yeah.
I've got to mention it because we've not mentioned him so far. Richard Stilgoe, the lyricist. The thing that struck me most about this show was how witty it was.
Oh, yeah.
And I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting it to be quite so delightfully fluent in not only the meaning for the songs, but the fact that there were jokes, sometimes overt, sometimes subtle, lots of puns, which are a particular favourite of mine. But I do think that Richard Stilgoe deserves a great deal of respect and applause for the flavours that he's added to this show. It's not just Andrew Lloyd Webber. And it is that lightness of touch which Richard Stilgoe brings, which I commend.
Yeah, but I agree with that. You know, if you like Andrew Lloyd Webber's music, you've got that. If you like listening to the lyrics and the jokes, some of the rhymes have to be heard to be believed.
Do you know, it dances around cheeky in some of the lyrics, by which I don't mean cheeky lyrics as in the meaning is cheeky. I mean that there's a man having a lot of fun with the playfulness, and he's inviting you to enjoy it too.
Yeah.
And you don't hear that very often. Sometimes there are what I would call lyrics, good lyrics, by which I don't mean pop lyrics, where actually rhymes don't make rhyme at all. So everything there is rhyming, or is at least manipulated into rhyming in a way that works and is creditable and indeed rather splendid because they're so clever but cheeky. And I love that. I love the fact that it's craft, and yet at the same time let's push at the envelope without breaking the boundary of what makes a crafty lyric. And I'm inviting you, the audience, to enjoy it with me. That's rare.
So yeah, it bears listening to time and time again.
Well, Josh, Starlight Express was a long-term favourite of yours, and still is, I think. This in no way has diminished your love of it. It's merely given you a new chapter in the story. For me, it was the opening chapter. It's the preface in my chapter on Starlight Express, in my ever-increasing appreciation of Andrew Lloyd Webber and his works, which you single-handedly have walked me into this, into his palace. So I can only thank you for A, the conversation, B, your insights, but most importantly of all, I think, helping to push me into areas I wouldn't normally go in the world of musical theatre, and discovering with me that I love them. So you have really taken me into new places, and I cannot thank you enough for that.
Well, thank you very much for coming along with me and humouring my nostalgia trip through Starlight Express.
And there are no puns and there are no jokes at the end of this. I just want to say, Josh, you're a wonderful man. Thank you very much.
A pleasure as always.
Musical talk. And there we are. A very positive Josh talking about Starlight Express and Hadestown, two of the shows that were on in London in the summer of 2024, which has proven to be one of the great theatrical summers, in my view, in terms of musical theatre, with both classic, contemporary and new shows coming to London. And that really doesn't happen as much as it ought. Well, that's about it for this week. Do join us again next week, or whenever, when we'll be talking about, well, whatever we are talking about. The world of musical theatre is so enormous, you never can tell. It could be something which is 150 years old, or it could be something that's really just been premiered in the last few days. But more likely, somewhere in between. So to draw the curtains on this week's episode, or perhaps more appropriately, cover the lifeless corpse with a blanket, let me use Oscar Hammerstein's immortal words: so long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk presented by Josh Clark and Thos Ribbits, and edited by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2024. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and follow us on the usual social media networks like Facebook, Instagram and X, formerly known as Twitter. And if you want to follow me on the latter, you can. at Musical Talk Thos.
National Theatre London 2018.
Oh.
UK premiere 2018 at the National Theatre. But West End, that probably means...
This isn't the
then
national
Broadway.
production, is it?
No.
That's been warmed up after COVID, or
No. West End premiere. That's what it's known as. I can use that. Okay, fine. What's at home?
Sorry, I hope you didn't mind my asking you, but it seems silly not to.
No, of course.
Thank you, by the way. That sounds like a train coming into a station.